Welcome to the Contrarians. Tonight we have a killer topic. The topic, what killed Prog? Or did it kill itself? Hey, we're going to dive into it, so let's get started. Welcome to the Contrarians, and tonight we have a great topic. If you're into prog, well, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking prog tonight. The topic for tonight, what killed prog, or did prog kill itself? So we've got a fine panel here, and you know, we couldn't talk prog unless we had Rand Kelly here, because for those in the audience, we know Rand is prog, for God's sakes. And we have Tom Curlis here, and also we have Tate Davis here, and of course Martin and myself are here. So we are just going to start out and just have a general discussion to see where this goes. Because really, did prog die? Did it get killed? We're going to get down to it to see what happened to prog back in the day. So let's get this started. I'm not sure how we should start this, because we do have the king of prog here.
Can I go last?
You want to go last?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. That's fine with me. Martin, do you want to start this off?
Sure, I could start it off.
We'll go Martin, Tom, Tate, and then Rand to bring this home.
All right.
All right, Martin.
Well, yeah, at the risk of, I don't want to like unfurl every concept here that we're going to talk about. So I'll keep it to my customary, I don't know, eight or 10 minutes, hopefully, kind of thing. But so I thought about this a little bit, right? So we're talking, we're in the UK, we're talking late 75, 76 for real in 77. In the US, we're talking punk is more like late 77, 78. But it doesn't take off anywhere, sort of thing. So prog guys always get their backup with this question. It's like, no, punk didn't kill prog because no punk succeeded, kind of thing, right? And that's a very valid point. I went through a bunch of prog bands. We could have this entire discussion with heavy metal as well, but let's keep it away from that. So what I find interesting here is I thought about this question a little bit, and you generally wouldn't say that punk killed prog because there are no successful punk bands. Now, when you get to the States, you do have some success happening with new wave bands. You have the Cars, you have the Knack, you have the success of Dire Straits, who are a UK band in the States. You have Elvis Costello, you have Joe Jackson, you have Blondie from the States, Elvis Costello and Joe Jackson from England. But here's the interesting point, I think. I feel like what happens is the labels try to sell punk, and they get excited about punk, and the critics get excited about punk, and these prog maestros with their big egos and their long careers, they're starting to realize they're not getting love or enthusiasm anymore. So even though the labels weren't successful at selling punk, it seemed like the entire apparatus was set up now to ridicule the prog guys and the heavy metal guys and the guys with the big bushy mustaches and the caftan robes and the long hair and the glitter and all that stuff, right? So I have a feeling that it almost feels a little bit more like the labels were not stroking their egos anymore. I hear, Geezer Butler is funny on this topic, right? Around Technical Ecstasy, saying Warner Brothers didn't care about us anymore at all. We were just shunted aside, kind of thing. So there is sort of that feeling that you get again with hair metal and grunge later on. But so I think in terms of there not being any success in punk, what happens is I feel like intrinsically or extrinsically, the label guys and the critics were saying, you guys got to get with the times, man. You guys got to change. And some of them did that. But going through the prog bands, I'll do this kind of quickly, like just a few examples. So Pink Floyd stormed right along. They did great. Wish You Were Here did well. Animals did well. The Wall did phenomenally. Yes, what Yes did is they did what Kiss did. They all went away and did solo albums. So they kind of like disappeared, right? But they came back strong with Going for the One. Tormato did well. then they have kind of a breakup and a couple years off sort of thing, and they come back with drama. But Genesis is a very interesting case because it's almost like they heed the advice. It's a two-pronged sort of advice. They themselves realize that as they evolve, they start writing in a shorter format. They also write some hit singles, Follow You, Follow Me, that kind of thing. And they also discover new technologies, and they're evolving and growing. But the funny thing is, the really funny thing is we always think of, Genesis, their relationship to punk. And then there were Three and Duke and Abacab and that. Genesis basically took the punk year off and put out Spot the Pigeon. I mean, it was basically Wind and Wuthering, and then there were Three. So they were having their own drama going on with losing members and becoming this smaller band, but they're evolving. But when they're super evolving, punk's long over with, kind of thing. Yeah. So they all have their own stories. They all do well. They all sell way more records than all the punk people anyways. But there is this evolution taking place. So I guess to sum up, I would say that it wasn't punk that killed prog. It was the labels and the critics and the fans' enthusiasm for punk that killed prog. There you go. That's my look at it.
There you go. Wow. Holy crap. Look at Rand. Rand, you're getting applause from Rand. And that's a rare thing. Rand just doesn't applaud for everybody. All right. Thanks, Martin. That is awesome. All right, Tom. What's your thoughts on this whole topic?
Well, Martin's so good at encapsulating, man. He gets through it really fast. And I got so many notes here. I'm going to try to be fast about it. That's
all right. We're good. We're good.
So I agree with you, Martin. It's interesting with the Genesis thing because they started morphing a little bit. And they had their first hit single in 1978. Like you said, Follow You, Follow Me was like a hit. So like right when they were maybe on the danger edge of being dangerously out of touch, they had this big hit, and they doubled their audience. All of a sudden, women liked Genesis, and like that was like that was huge for them. They even talk about that, how that song kind of changed their career a little bit, their career arc or whatever. But they were also, it seemed like that was the one big progressive band that were aware, and they were changing. They were mildly changing. They weren't massively changing, but they were changing gradually. And they by the time they got to Abacab, like you said, it was kind of like, okay, they're doing different things now, I always talk about the Bill Bruford quote where he says, when he left Yes, he said, "Why did you leave Yes? It's one of the most popular bands, and you guys are making tons of money, and you're successful. Why would you leave that band?" He's like, "All I could think that we could do next is just do Son of Close to the Edge." And once they hit Close to the Edge, I mean, you could look at that and what did they do next? They did Tales from Topographic Oceans for Close to the Edges, and not as successful, in my opinion. So at some point, maybe some of these big progressive bands were sort of losing a little bit of steam. I mean, yeah, okay. There are parts of Topographic Oceans that are great, but it's like it's too much. It's like four sides of epics, and it got to the point where like they were on top of the world and they could do anything they wanted, but maybe things weren't going in a direction that they. And so, anyway, there's also cultural changes, right? As Martin was talking about. I mean, the critics were getting tired of this pompous rock this virtuoso pompous rock. I mean, ELP and Yes were kind of like the poster children for like this pompous, the P word, pretentious, right? These guys are just, they think they're influenced by classical music and they're just the best musicians on the planet and they can do whatever they want and they can have tours that are, bring 30-piece orchestras. And it was like, wait a minute, isn't rock and roll supposed to be like the people's, genre? I mean, and people like Robert Christgau and Lester Bangs were writing and, saying like, these guys are just dinosaurs, man. We need to move on. Like Martin was saying, the culture was kind of moving to let's get rid of these guys and get a new, and then even like Pink Floyd. I mean, you mentioned Animals. I mean, Animals is tough. Animals like a hard, tough record. So Pink Floyd had definitely changed a little bit as well. I mean, with Roger Waters taking the reins and, talking about social issues and getting really, that album is just tough. And the Animals tour, what's interesting is the Animals tour, people didn't just smoke pot and listen to these long epics that they would do and sit back and go, "Oh, this is great, man." People were like lighting off fireworks and yelling and screaming, and when they were playing these huge stadiums, things were changing, right? And it was like they weren't listening like that anymore. So like the culture, it felt like the culture was kind of shifting. So yeah, there is a little bit of prog killing itself, but I do think that, any genre, at some point you're going to start, like even punk, like, Martin mentioned, punk turns into new wave pretty quickly. Certain genres, you think about genres, they don't last. I mean, but prog did last. The thing is, it just morphed, right? I mean, it wasn't like it was in the early 70s, but it morphed. And people talk about prog probably more today than ever. I mean, it seems like there's tons of prog fans all over the place. It almost, in some ways, it's kind of come out of the closet a lot in recent years. But yeah, it's hard to say what exactly killed it, or did it kill itself? I do think there was a lot of that there was so much success with it that it kind of got top heavy and kind of toppled over a little bit. But and I also think there were cultural changes. There was winds of change happening, and you couldn't just keep doing these long epics. After a while, it was like, we need to do something different, and we need to be a little more. And also record companies want to make money. People like Gentle Giant tried to change, right? They couldn't. There's certain bands that tried to change and they couldn't. Or they didn't, or something. They weren't successful at it. And the record companies were saying, you can't keep doing these huge up. You got to do more commercial music. So they were getting pushed. Bands were getting pushed to do something different. And some bands could do it. Some bands couldn't. So that's my take on it.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool.
Holy macro. This panel is on fire, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Thanks, Tom. That was quite a performance. All right. Tate, let's throw it over to you, my friend. What's your thoughts on this whole topic?
So I'd like to look through this whole discussion through the lens of what Tom just discussed. Prog in the late 70s, specifically between the years of 1977 and 1980. And I'll just sort of go through sort of what Martin and Tom did, is kind of go through some examples, and maybe give my own brief opinions on the albums and sort of how it relates back to the topic we're discussing. So I do think that there were several prog I do think part of what killed prog eventually was the prog bands feeling like that they had to change their sound in order to appeal to this new medium that was into disco and new wave and everything like that. And new wave is basically the commercial term for punk, because by the late 70s, like Martin said, you had the Cars and the Knack, and the Talking Heads were picking up steam, and then eventually that led to like Flock of Seagulls and all those other new wave bands of the 80s. And some of those prog bands, both British and American, in my opinion, were making some of their best material. Like Gentle Giant, I'm gonna get shot for saying this, but The Missing Piece, Giant for a Date Civilian are my three favorite Gentle Giant albums. I think that they did the commercial thing really, really well. They didn't. I mean, I'm sure if you ask Derek Shulman, he'll tell you that he hated that period of the band's career, but I think they did it really well. I mean, especially after listening to the new Steven Wilson remix of The Missing Piece. I mean, the songwriting on there is just great. Like, I mean, 2 weeks in Spain and Memories of Old Days, and Bet You Thought We Couldn't Do It, and then eventually you had the title track of Giant for a Day of Spooky Boogie, and then Civilian, you had a really commercial song like Convenience, which shows that their ability to do it. Now the problem is that pretty much turned off all the hardcore Gentle Giant fans who were really interested in the whimsical stuff of, like Acquiring the Taste and Octopus and Three Friends and everything like that. And they kept changing labels every other album, and I just didn't think that they really knew how the label really knew to market them really well. So that was Gentle Giant. Yes, we're still continuing to have success in the United States in 1977 with the release of the Holy Grail of Yes albums, in my opinion, going for the one. And then 78, you had Tormato, which is still a good album in my opinion, but not very successful. But a lot of Yes fans hate it because of the production and, you know, how ridiculous Arriving UFO is in Circus of Heaven. Um, and then you know, before you knew it, you know, Anderson and Wakeman were out, and the Buggles end up joining Yes, and they come out with the amazing manifestation that is Drama. Tempest Fugit's one of the greatest songs that band ever did. And you know, that did fairly well. I mean, it, you know, from what I read, it didn't really sell as much as they were expecting with that, but they, you know, they were still able to. I'm not sure if Yes really changed with the time. They started changing with the times a little bit because the stuff on there's some stuff ongoing for the One and Termato that's a little bit more commercial and a little bit more accessible. Like Parallels, I think is an example of that ongoing for the One. And then Drama to me is like an about face to that. That's pretty full on prog and, you know, almost heavy metal and sort of way. Emerson, Lake and Palmer put out the Works albums and then put out Love Beach. Now, I really like Love Beach. Again, I'm going to get shot for saying that because ELP fans think that everything that they did after, you know, studio-wise Brain Salad Surgery and then, you know, canonically Welcome Back My Friends to the Show That Never Ends live album is just not worth listening to. And, you know, there's still some really good stuff there, just not quite as good. But you know, that Love Beach was a bomb for that. I mean, you know, doesn't matter what I think of it. You know, a lot of the fans hated it. So ELP weren't necessarily successful. Jethro Tull this will be the last one of the kind of the big ones. Jethro Tull were going through a period of like really cool folk rock and adding kind of more whimsical folk elements to their sound through those years. And then eventually in 1980, you have the A album, which was originally supposed to be an Ian Anderson solo album, but it turned out to be kind of a new wavy Jethro Tull album. Black Sunday, one of my favorite Jethro Tull songs of all time. What a great tune that is. And that did, and you know, I looked at the chart figures on Songs for the Wood, Stormwatch, and Heavy Horses. They still did really well in the States. And then moving on to the American side of things, you have Styx in Kansas and, you know, to a lesser extent, Foreigner that, you know, we're having all this huge chart success and, you know, their albums going multi-platinum and whatnot. And you know, while still having kind of a prog edge to their music. And then you have like other American full-on prog bands like Starcastle and Cathedral and what's the one that I'm thinking of? I just had it. Oh, Happy the Man. That was it. That are making some really, really cool progressive rock music that just, if it came out, you know, 5 years earlier, it would have done really well. So,
hey, don't forget Rush as well. Rush makes the proggiest albums ever in 77 and 78.
Yeah,
power ahead. They just get bigger and bigger and bigger, right?
That's true. That's true. Good point.
Completely forgot about Rush. Thanks, Martin. And so what does this whole thing have to do with the topic at hand? Well, I think that what killed prog was like what Tom was saying before. It's a combination of the prog bands of the early 70s feeling like that they have to change their sound with the times and pissing off their like hardcore fan base who, you know, liked the Topographic Oceans and the Thick as a Brick and that sort of thing, the Passion Plays. And you know, just a bunch of, and then just a certain sect of people, you know, the mainstream populace just wanting to stop, you know, having enough of the whole prog thing. Like, you know, because, you know, there was sort of a disconnect because a lot of these prog bands were playing these big arenas and big theaters and, you know, not necessarily interacting with the audience a whole lot. In between, you know, not having time for, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hour long show, you know, they're playing 25-minute songs. And, there was sort of a disconnect between the artist and the performer. And people are going to see these punk bands in like small clubs around New York City and London. And they're having a connection with the audience because they're, headbanging and moshing. And, and lyrically, these punk bands are singing about the real issues of the day, about what they're pissed off with, instead of, musically masturbating, for lack of a better term, these 23-minute long keyboard solos, that just gets boring after a while.
For the record, Tate, I think this is funny. We haven't said the name of a single punk band yet, so I want to pay homage to.
But we've mentioned masturbation, for God's sake.
Exactly right. That came before any punk bands. So the punk bands we're talking about here, which I love, they're all heroes of mine, are the Damned, the Clash, the Sex Pistols, the Adverts. In New York, there's not that many, but it's basically the Ramones and the purest punk band of them all, the Cleveland Transplants, the Dead Boys, you got the Dictators, and everywhere else it's kind of late. Toronto has a bit of a scene with the Diodes and the Vile Tones from Hamilton. You've got Fear and X coming up in LA, but I mean, that's all late, right? I mean, basically there's a handful of bands, and then in the UK there's a bunch more bands, but they get less punky as we go. I mean, Boom Rats is pretty heavy. We get the Saints as well. They're punk. Eater.
My apologies for taking so long to actually mention a name of a punk band, but I was just trying to look through the lens. I was just trying to look through the lens of because it's hard for me to kind of add a perspective to this sort of thing, because I wasn't alive at the time. I was born in 1998.
Oh, for God's sakes.
Don't have any sort of understanding with this sort of thing. But that's the reason why I kind of chose to look at through the lens of the prog bands that I liked and what they were putting out in the late 70s when punk was sort of kind of getting its start. But yeah, overall that's kind of what killed prog, in my opinion.
All right, that's good. But I'm going to throw this out there before we talk to Mr. Prog himself. We're talking 1982, gentlemen. And Asia had a #1 Billboard chart-topping album with their first record. Now, you might say that that's not prog. I'd say it's more prog light, but I don't think prog totally died and went away, because we're talking 1982, and that record was a big record.
And Yes was huge in 83, and Genesis was huge in 83, right?
But I'd say the Asia album, though, really has a lot of prog elements there, as opposed to you get to Genesis and they're pretty much watered down. But I think it basically just morphed. It couldn't stay the way it always had. It just had to morph into these other things. Now, I don't know what happened later when it just started to revert back, but you have to look at the Asia album, a great record. It got great reviews, and it opened up, it made prog a lot more commercial to a lot more people. But me personally, I think it just morphed. I don't think it really killed. I don't think anything killed it. I think it just morphed. But I'm going to throw it over to Rand Kelly, because Rand is prog, for God's sakes, and we want to hear what he has to say. So Rand, what's your thoughts on this? What happened? Did prog die? Did prog get killed? What's your thoughts on this?
I've been thinking about this, listening to all you guys, and you're all right in various ways. Everyone is correct, absolutely. But I was thinking this title should have been "What Killed Punk," or did punk kill itself?
Well, punk did die, and prog is still going. So
there you go. That's what I'm talking about.
See, Rand's doing a switcheroo. He's switching it up.
No, but I think Rand's got a good point.
Another thing too, I think, to understand this theme topic, you got to understand, where did it come from? What created prog?
The Beatles. I'm the Walrus.
And the Doors, and Brian Wilson, and
Smile,
Steve Winwood, and Robert Fripp, and Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa was probably first. If you go back and look 66. At Freak Out, Freak Out and Pet Sounds come out the same year.
Mm-hmm.
They don't sound anything alike, but they're totally nobody ever heard anything like them, right? They're totally different. They come from the same area, LA. So it's like this term we were talking about, prog, we didn't know what that was. I was born in 1952, guys. I'll be 72 on September 5th.
Holy crap.
In 1969, where they always say that prog started with King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King.
It didn't.
No, that was just one of the bands. They just had all these different bands doing different things. Bill Bruford said, these were the years where we could do anything we want, and we did. Yet the idea was to be different from everybody else. And he says, and nowadays, everybody wants to be the same as everybody else. But back then, we didn't have a category for this. It was just, I've said it before, you walk into a record store to go buy a record at 20 years old, and it's just A to Z. There are no categories. I mean, they had country, and they had, like soundtracks, and they
jazz.
But the rock section was A to Z, and you would just go in and say, I remember walking into some even later than that, walking in where people had prog sections and stuff like that. And you'd walk into Tower and go, do you have a prog section? Nope, just A to Z. They'd go right back to the 1970 model and say, you're on your own. Find what you want, buy it, and come back, So we just didn't have this term, progressive rock. It wasn't even around then. I mean, when I first saw Yes, they were opening for Black Sabbath in Las Vegas, and that was 1972. The original opening band on that night was a group called Wild Turkey. Nobody ever talks about Wild Turkey. They were great. The bass player of that band came from Jethro Tull, Glenn Cornick. And the lead singer ends up with Rick Wakeman. Now, Rick Wakeman, he leaves Yes because he can't stand the foolishness of Tales from Topographic Oceans, and he debuts a brand new album with new songs live, with an orchestra and a choir and a narrator, and it's huge. So he figures, I can do that again, and he puts out the Myths and Legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, but this time I'm going to put it on ice. And there's going to be skaters and everything. It's just like, that was the part that the punky people said, all right, this has got to end. And then when they saw Emerson, Lake and Palmer driving around America with 3 separate trucks with ELP on the top of every trailer, that's where I think it started to go haywire for what we were calling progressive rock by then. But in the early days, that term, I don't know where that term came from, but it was just like, this band does this band does that. And if you don't like this style of music, you can go to UFO, and you can go to Black Sabbath, and you can go to Thin Lizzy, and you can go to, you know what I'm saying? These different bands that aren't weird, But just as this is starting to really mushroom up to a point where it's just about ready to burst, you get the Sex Pistols. And you got guys like Rick Wakeman going, I love that album. That's great. That's what we needed. We needed something like that. And then what happens around that time, the radio stations stopped playing this weird music. It just disappears. It's all going to go away. Clear Channel took over FM radio, and they took away the ability for DJs to pick up the phone and take requests from people. And then they started programming what you were going to hear. And then everybody started requesting what they were telling you were hearing. You know what I mean? The request line went from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different bands to 40 bands every 3 hours, every single day. This is still happening today on my local FM station. Every time I put it on, I hear AC/DC, I hear Tom Petty, I hear Bob Seger. I don't ever hear prog. They don't ever play prog. And if they play Yes, they play Owner of a Lonely Heart. And that, this is what I'm going with this. So just the funniest thing about all of this is in 1977, like, Tate, I think, he said that Gentle Giant, the last 3 albums, they were playing that kind of stuff. And then all that's starting to disappear. And then what happens? UK forms in 1978 with Alan Haldsworth and plays the weirdest music ever, and it's huge. I went and saw that band. They opened for Al Di Meola in Sacramento. They were incredible. 45 minutes of absolute bliss. Oh, Haldsworth looked like he wanted to go home. But other than that, you know, it was amazing. And the other band out of England that was doing the same thing at the same time, National Health, Dave Stewart, Amanda Parsons, who I consider an absolute goddess in vocal, and Phil Miller on guitar, and Neil Murray on bass, and Pip Pyle on drums. They put out that first album, and the second album was a little bit different because there's no female vocals on it. They're playing the weirdest, most complex, strangest music, prog as you can get. And the entire radio stations are going, we're not playing that. No way. We're not going near that. So it's like, and then you talk about Drama. Drama's a prog album. It did okay, but a lot of fans said, you know, no John Anderson, no Yes, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then they broke up on the tour because Trevor Horn just didn't want to do it anymore. It was too hard on his voice. And he's an excellent producer. So, of course, he made the album sound incredible. A lot of people don't know this, but Eddie Offord did do the backing tracks, like the drums and the bass, before Trevor Horn got involved with all that other stuff, you know, the coloring of it all. And they went away and everything. And like Grant mentions in 1982, Asia changes everything. I mean, like, but we heard they were coming. We saw it on the back of the Melody Maker, and it showed those four guys, and it said, "Get ready, Asia's coming." And we thought it was going to be a fantastic prog album, just super complex and everything. And when we listened to it, me and my friends, we just went, what the hell are these guys doing? And they made buku bucks, didn't they? But the second album came out and it died a death. Nobody likes Alpha. And I think the reason is because the producer, Mike Stone, said he purposely mixed side one to make it sound like it was going to come out of a American car radio with one speaker in the dashboard. And that is what that album sounds like on those first set of songs. You listen to Don't Cry and you're going, holy God, what happened to this band? But anyways, then all of a sudden you got 90125. Yes is back. This is amazing. Who's Trevor Rabin? I was already a Trevor Rabin fan. I had a couple of his albums all ready to go and everything. So I knew what he could do. And then I heard it. I heard "Own of a Lonely Heart," and I went, oh my God. The prog is gone. Our song, the flip side of the single, because I bought the 45 before the album came out. Our song, to me, is the proggiest song on that album. I love it. So when I went to see him live in 1984 at the Cow Palace with my ex, I was hoping they would play our song, and they didn't. They played the entire album except for that one tune.
Just because.
Just because Rand wanted it, you know. But anyways, you go through the 80s and stuff like that, and you start seeing bands like in the early Marillion, Palace, Solstice, 12th Night, on and on and on. All these bands, and they were calling it the new wave of British progressive rock because they took it from the metal thing and made it their own. But you read about them in Kerrang. You bought Kerrang magazine, you could find out all about these bands and stuff. And I was like, this is great. There's a second surge. I'll call it the second surge in the 80s. And then you go through the 80s and it's just impossible to find prog. It is. It literally disappears for a while until the 90s. Dream Theater comes out in 1989 with When Dream and Day Unite, and that's a prog metal album. So that you can see what's going on here. And I was in communication with the band Magellan, and God bless them, those two brothers, Trent and Wayne Gardner. I don't know what happened there, but they took their own lives, and they were great musicians. And I had written Trent Gardner a letter, and he called me up on the phone, and we talked for about an hour, and he said, Rand, he said, prog is going to die unless we get successful Dream Theater images and words. If that thing sells, then we've got a chance. Everybody else can come up behind them, and then Magna Carta pushed it all up, But to me, to get to the point of this, Prog never died, and it didn't kill itself. It took a couple of siestas.
That's a great
3
point.
times,
Yeah.
4 times.
Let's, for the record, also say
about-
Punk didn't die either, right? We know
Like-
Punk didn't die either, right?
No,
So
of
we
course
know
not.
it went on and had some big
The Green Day.
yeah.
I don't
Well,
know
that whole pop punk thing, the SoCal thing, but it also had hardcore
Paramore,
and all
too.
that, and Oi and everything. So
Right.
it lived on. But you're right, Rand. I love the way you put it. It had a couple of siestas. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they just took a break because you have to recharge. You can't constantly, I mean, that's what Yes did. I think of all the bands that you mentioned, Martin, Rush and King Crimson are the outliers of all this, because Fripp saw the writing on the wall, right? With Red, he killed the band until 1981, and look what they came back with: Discipline,
Yeah.
Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair. And those didn't sell huge, but they sold well to the fans. And now look what's happening. I'm about to go see a band called Beat in September that's going to play material just from those 3 albums. So, it just depends on the love of it's not the love of the genre, it's the love of each individual band or musician. Peter Gabriel's another example, but Genesis, I'd have to say they were the smartest. They did the right thing. They realized, like, people were asking Phil Collins, why did you change your sound? And he says, just like this lamp right here, he says, I'm not going to have that same lamp in 10 years. I'll have a different lamp. He just said, things have to evolve. And when you see the subtle changes in Genesis, when Steve Hackett leaves, and then there were 3, like you said, and then Duke, and then Abacab, and then the self-titled album, you can see they're sort of like, they're trying to guide everybody with them, but they're also trying to please everybody as they go, but they get more and more popular, and they saw that. And I think that's why it culminated in We Can't Dance. And then they didn't know where to go from there. And then Phil just said, I don't need this anymore. I'm super popular all by myself.
I think Tony Banks said back in the day that they pushed it. They took prog as far as they could go. There was no place else. They'd already done it.
And
my whole theory on that is, yeah, you guys can write all these prog songs, odd time signatures, but the thing with Genesis, this is just me. You can burn my house down, burn across my yard.
Where do you live?
The thing is, you could do all that prog stuff, noodle away all you want. But the thing about Genesis is that the quality of those 3 songwriters, you show me someone in the 80s that could write pop songs as well as Banks, Rutherford, and Collins. Those guys honed their skills doing prog, and when it got down to really writing these pop masterpieces, I don't know anybody else could write as well as those guys.
Joe Puerta and David Pack from Ambrosia, maybe?
Oh, I love Ambrosia. But see, the thing
yeah,
is,
but they didn't have a lifespan like Genesis did.
No, but they did. They were able to write, really good pop songs.
Well, yeah, but they never had the success that Genesis did.
Yeah, they never had the success of Genesis, but they did have, they were a prog band essentially that had, that was able to write pop songs.
Here's what I want to say about Ambrosia. Everybody labels them as yacht rock. They have 3 commercial singles. Everything else they have is absolutely rock or progressive rock or prog.
Oh yeah.
I saw them.
That's great.
Yeah, I saw them live at Cal Prog 2010, and they were doing their prog set, and they decided to throw in Holding On to Yesterday from the first album. And Joe Puerta goes, well, it may not be prog to you, but we just think of it as a prog blues.
Rand, I saw them in 1978.
Oh, nice. Yeah, with David Pack. I've never seen him with David Pack.
Well, you got to see him with David Pack.
But there's another band that sort of straddles the fence. out of Canada called Saga.
Oh yeah.
Nobody knows who they are. I've got every album they ever put out. It's like long, it's a long list of CDs, but they always put out really, really, really complex music over danceable drums.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Steve Negus's drums and the other guys that came in behind him are always playing steady beats that you can dance to in 4/4 time. And then all that other twiddly bit stuff with Ian Crichton and the keyboard players, Jim Gilmore, that's all just icing cake, That's a smart band, really. But nobody in America knows about them. They never get airplay. I remember seeing them on MTV for like 1 or 2 times when they sang in 1985, What Do I Know? They did a video for that, and they played the video, and it was gone.
But they had another hit. What was it? Turn Me Loose or
Don't Be
On
Late.
the Loose?
On the Loose.
On the Loose.
They're gonna love her boy.
Don't Be Late was after that. It came out on the Silent Night album, and they did a really nice video of that. And I saw that on Much Music, and I had a satellite. I could get it in those days, but it was like, holy cow, And then JD Roberts, the VJ guy on Much Music. You remember Much Music, right, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So he's doing an interview with Steve Negus and Jim Gilmore about you guys don't do the really intense complex music. And he goes, you can only do those musical gymnastics for so long. And he goes, and you got to eat.
A lot of it has to do is make money.
Yeah, you got to survive as a band, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like somebody said, the record companies, right? You got to please the record companies, and the record companies have to please the radio stations. The fan is the last on the list, and nobody cares about them.
I just want to make one more quick point. If we had Parish here, he'd sort of back me up on this. But in the UK, again, getting back to this thing about the hype and the fans and what the press wants and who's getting column inches and all those English newspapers. It's all about the charts over there. And definitely during that punk period, you could look at those punk bands as a thriving situation because they were getting long articles, they were getting high up the charts, and they were selling records in the UK. So I think there was a little bit more of a parody and a war and a commercial war going on in the UK. Right during 1977 than there was ever in the States. I think the States, it was just way off kilter. And if I can add one more thing to it, I mean, I almost feel like there's also a little bit of that tax exile thing, and also the exile of bigger bands playing America because you need the bigger venues. So when these prog bands get really big, and a lot of equipment and players and all that stuff and big stage shows. So there's always, that undercurrent of the UK fan feeling miffed that their big bands don't play UK enough. They're not home enough. But yeah, I feel like I do feel like there's this element of these guys are looking like inside their head. Everybody's telling them they're dinosaurs, and they start buying the hype after a while, even though, if we look at where the sales and everything matters in the long history of it, the prog bands did rather well all through this period, and no punk band did well at all. I mean, it took there to be new wave bands to have any sort of success. There were no punk bands that did
right, and the radio needed hit singles, and like for instance, Pink Floyd, the Animals. There's no hit single there. There's not a song that you can put on the radio. They're all long. Sheep's long, Pigs is long, Dogs is really long. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to do? Just play Pigs on the Wing Part 1 and Part 2 and say that was Pink Floyd?
Well, and to take it back to Gentle Giant real quick, on stuff like The Missing Piece and, Giant for a Day and Civilian, there's some songs on there that could have been fairly big hit singles.
Oh, yeah.
Like I think 2 Weeks in Spain could have been a single. I think the title track to Giant for a Day could have been a single. And I think that convenience.
Well, they tried playing Giant for a Day on. They made a video out of it, before MTV was created. They did these things called video promotional or promotional videos or something like that. I think they were called promotional films at that time. But who could you play them to? You know, the only way you could get them on was like Night Flight or the Midnight Special or ABC's Rock Concert, Don Kirshner's Rock Concert, and I saw Gentle Giant on Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. And they played Funny Ways. And Knots. They played Funny Ways and Knots.
Oh,
and
okay.
Knots is insane. I mean,
Knots is crazy.
Yeah, great song from the album.
You know, and On Reflection is Knots times two. You know.
Oh yeah.
And Tate, you got it.
I agree with you about per day. If you listen to that album on its own merit, just say like you don't know nothing about Gentle Giant, never heard of them or anything like that. Hey, there's this band called Gentle Giant. They put out an album called Giant for a Day. Don't worry about the cover. Yeah, it looks silly. But it's the only thing they ever did. It's a one and done. Go ahead and listen to it. It's a great album.
It is a great album. It is a great album. And I don't
it's the expectations that Gentle Giant fans had from, because I started with Power and the Glory, which is a great freaking album. Yeah. But you know, Power and the Glory, Freehand, Octopus, Three Friends, and Interview, and The Missing Piece, and then you put on Giant for a Day, and everybody just goes, what the hell is this crap? It's 1978. That's what it is. That's the year where they said, no more insanity. You guys have to play normal. There's normal people out there. They're the record buyers. We don't need to cater to the cult. This is the problem that Frank Zappa had all along. His music was so complex and so crazy, and of course he didn't help himself with all the profanity, but you know, it was just going to be a small little niche of people like me and you and you know, people that love him that were going to get into it. So they knew that they weren't going to be huge. Now you got a bit like Styx, and they're not even noticed until Grand Illusion.
Yeah. With the exception of Lady.
They started in 1970. All right, they started in 1972, and they had to go 5 years before they could get huge. Lady was a big hit on the second album, but after that, I mean, they never played anything off of The Serpent is Rising, Man of Miracles. Never heard anything like that on the radio. And then when I heard Equinox, I was like, holy crap. And when I heard the song Mother Dear, which nobody ever talks about, so I will now, that's the best Yes song they never wrote.
Yeah.
I love that tune. Lonely feeling in the city. I just like, oh God, that on the mini Moog, which I've got right back here. It's just like, oh my God, that is so Yes. But they only did it on one song. Starcastle did it on 3 albums. Radio. Yeah. Starcastle couldn't get on the radio.
No.
Unbelievable. But
those Starcastle, those first 2 Starcastle albums are underrated.
Was smart because they put out singles, Closer to the Heart. That really, really put them on the map for Farewell to Kings. And then they put out you know, like other things, you know, like Moving Pictures for crying out loud. Free Will. That's my favorite Rush song ever. Tom Sawyer. I mean, my God, these songs, and The Spirit of Radio is what it meant. But Tom Sawyer too. But and you know, they were smart because they constantly developed their sound as all the other trends and the fashions are doing whatever they're doing. Rush just stuck to their guns and did whatever the hell they wanted, and I respect them so much because I think Yes really kind of screwed themselves, and they've said it too. With Honorable Heart was the only song they had that went to #1. It destroyed their career.
Yeah.
If it hadn't have been for you know, because like Big Generator was a flop and it didn't do well, and Anderson
Well, wait a minute.
Great album.
There was a big time period between
3 years.
Well, a lot can happen in 3 years with the musical landscape.
But that's my point. The band broke up after Big Generator. They were in shambles, and Chris Squire, he just started his own group, you know, and so they wanted to get back together with Bill Bruford, but we don't have to go down
Well,
that road.
3 years between albums in the 80s is a lot. It's not like today where you have a band, they go 5 or 6, 7 years without a record. But
Yeah.
back in the 80s, 3 years
Look
is
at-
a lot.
Yeah, I remember waiting. I was waiting for the big generator. I was like, where is the next Yes album? Where is it? Where is it? I was waiting for it. And then it
Yeah.
came out. It was like, it's okay.
You know, they were
Well,
talking-
and I'll argue.
It just
I'll
sounds
argue
like
that there's-
part 2 to me. I don't know.
Well, Big Generator,
much
you know,
different.
they were talking about Chris Squire himself was talking about we've got a really big epic on there. The fans of the old stuff are gonna love it. And when it came out, I'm Running. Great song. I don't consider that a super prog epic. I mean, it's
No.
fast and it does a lot of things. But actually, it's funny. My favorite song on that album is Final Eyes.
Yeah.
It's a good
I
song.
love Final Eyes.
Well, then, and to take it back to Genesis real quick, you know, you have Invisible Touch, which was a huge album for
Mhm.
them. The one thing that's pure pop. The only
Well-
thing that's even remotely proggy on there is Domino. And
They're
That's
out
my
of
le-
Prague by then. They'd already done it. They're done.
yeah, no, but Domino is. I would still say
Domino's
Domino's
great. I love
pretty
Domino.
damn proggy. It's
Are
it's
there
like
any
prog
prog
synth
guys
pop.
that went punk? I mean, the only thing I can think of is like You Burn Me Up, I'm a Cigarette, or Robert Fripp Exposure, or Nadir's Big Chance, Peter Hamill, or whatever. But for brief moments, did any prog guy ever go punk?
What about punk guys going prog? Look at the Police. The first album, Outlandos I can't even say that.
Outlandos D'Amore.
Or,
Yeah. Okay, so look at that album and then look at Synchronicity. I mean, God.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Synchronicity.
the Police were really
Yeah.
never. They were. You
They
saw
were
that
fake punks. They were fake,
fake
punks.
punk. You
Well,
saw
XTC, if you get really post punk and super creative new wavy, you could be considered prog, right? XTC,
Right.
Magazine, PIL.
Joy
Yeah.
Division to a lesser
And-
extent.
Yeah, I
would
don't
be.
know. I don't know most of those bands. I
And-
haven't listened to XTC or Joy Division or anything.
What would
like
you
that.
consider Daryl Hall's Sacred Songs that he did with Robert Fripp?
Glad you brought that up. I wanted to talk about that because it's on the album cover where he's going like this.
Yeah.
That's not the King Crimson Salute, folks. This is.
I thought that was something else.
Daryl
I'm not going
Hall-
to say it, but I thought it was something
Daryl Hall
else.
is doing the Baphomet salute for the goat. Anyway. I just wanted to point that out that it's not the Fripp thing.
But how do you look at that Daryl Hall album?
I had it and got rid of it. What is that?
Oh, it's a
tell you?
great record. That is a great record.
I'd have to listen to it again, but I wasn't ready for it. You know, that was what he was calling the drive to 1981
Mm-hmm.
because he put out League of Gentlemen and then he put out Let the Power Fall or whatever, and then he put out Sacred Song. I love Exposure. I think that's a great album. I love Fripp. I own so much Fripp. It's
Is
ridiculous.
Exposure
Well,
the
does
one
it-
that's got You Smoked Me Like a Cigarette? Whatever you said, Martin.
You Burn Me Up, I'm a Cigarette.
Yeah, that's like that was all recorded at the same time as Sacred Songs.
Yeah. But
The other
that's
one I
all-
want to mention that's kind of funny is Ian Gillan quits a heavy metal band and puts out and starts a prog band, and then he quits the prog band and starts a punk band in a way. So
Well,
Ian
Ian
Gillan band is a prog fusion sort of band, and that's during punk. And then the Gillan band, I always consider them the punk Deep Purple. They're pretty punky. They're pretty nasty and fast and distorted. The Gillan band, and that's during the new wave of British heavy metal, but it's kind of punky. So
when
it's
you're-
like, yeah, what other heavy metal guys ever went punk?
When you're talking about Ian Gillan went prog, are you talking about Child in Time and Scarabus?
Yeah, Clear Air, Turbulence, yeah, Scarabus,
other-
and Child in Time. Yeah, I mean they're fusion, jazz fusion albums almost, right?
Yeah. And what do you think of Magic? You like Magic?
Oh, I love the Gillan band. I hate the Ian Gillan band. I love Gillan.
Oh, okay. Huh, interesting.
But Martin,
Wow.
Martin, you're right. I just wanted to piggyback on, you're right. In the States, I didn't feel a sea change of music until, like you said, more like the post-punk new wave with the Police, the Pretenders, XTC, Elvis Costello, all of those. That's when I felt in the States that, oh, things are changing. Like it felt in the Cars. It was like art. It was almost like art, pop, art, rock, punk. It was
Mhm.
like kind of all. It just felt like a big sea change in the U.S. at that point.
Well, I
Yeah,
remember, but I
Chris.
remember when that first Cars album came out. And me being a kid during that time, I didn't have any I didn't know what was happening across the sea. The whole punk movement that never really came here. But I remember that first Cars album came out, and we all thought it was so radical and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
new and
Yeah.
so new wave because we really didn't have anything to compare it to. I mean, it was
Yeah.
like out of this world.
Things
you
like
know?
moving in stereo. You're like, what is this?
What is
I love-
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible stuff.
And
Incredible.
it's kind of lightweight compared to what was happening in the UK, to be honest. But
Right.
here in the States, it was totally
Well,
blew us away.
I've got a term for the Cars, Roxy Music, Ultravox, Supertramp, Bebop Deluxe. I don't think I invented it, but I think it really fits. I'm going to call it sophistopop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because and then you could take this further with rock bands. Look at King's X, Crack the Sky, the Tubes, Utopia, some of those groups. You could call that sophista rock.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think on Sea of Tranquility, we
or
were
you
calling it
I
progressive pop.
watched the show. Yeah,
There's so many different terms.
I told Scott Lade today, and he agreed with me.
Is that what he said? Because I think he came up with.
He likes sophistopop. I also put up IntelliPop, and he goes, "No." He goes, "I like sophistopop."
So
There you
I
go.
also wanted to say with Tate mentioned Jethro, I was going to say Jethro Tull, that they, even in their deepest prog period, they were trying to be cool about it. Like they were trying to act like Thick as a Brick was like, oh yeah, it's really, but we're dressing up like bunnies and we're taking calls on stage and we're
I
like,
saw that tour. I saw that.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah, Eagles opened. I saw it in Las
The
Vegas.
Eagles open?
Took a phone call on the piano with the bunny
Yeah,
suit.
and you get a phone call in the middle of the song.
I did. Yeah, nothing too. Since you're talking
Cocaine's
about
a hell of a drug, ladies and
remember
gentlemen.
remember somebody mentioned Songs from the Wood? That's Gentle Giant. That whole album is Gentle
Yeah,
Giant.
yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah.
Vocally, I mean, good God.
All right, boys, let's wrap this
Anyway.
dog up. We've went an hour. I don't
Fine.
think we've solved this topic.
Yeah, I just don't think. I think the question is based on a bad predicate.
Premise.
Premise.
Yeah.
Premise.
To me, it didn't die. It never did die. It just hid away at certain points and let everybody else do their thing until everybody got bored with that, and then the people that really like that kind of music decided to get back into it.
It
That's why
hibernated.
I had a hard time finding prog during the 80s, so I became a metal fan. I started buying metal,
Right.
a lot of metal. And
lot of
that's when I
people
got
did
into
that.
Iron Maiden. I got into Iron Maiden big time, and they are prog metal. I think they are the actual, them and Black Sabbath are probably the progenitors of prog metal. I can't think of it, two other bands that could be doing it so well. But my God, the Sabotage album, that whole album's prog metal.
Yeah.
Megalomania or whatever that one is, and the Writ, holy Christ.
Well, and Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath too is pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But to
definitely.
distill this down, when people ask this question, it really has the most pertinence in the UK in 1977. That's what the big debate is about, right? Like the debate is what's going on in Sounds and Melody Maker and the Enemy and Music Maker or Melody Maker, right?
Mhm.
Record Mirror. That's really the nub of the question is this insane, fight for column inches and chart position and all that stuff between all these guys. And it was a literal battle of philosophies between those two camps going on. That's really where this question matters the most, right?
Yeah.
But look who's touring right now, and they're not coming anywhere near the not now. They're selling tickets now, but for later, they're not coming anywhere near California or the West Coast. Deep Purple with Yes opening. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I've never seen Deep Purple. I would love to see them, but I wrote Billy Sherwood today on Facebook because he put up a post, and I said, "Why no West Coast dates, Billy?" I'm sure
It's
something
not
will
up
happen.
to them. It's up to these
Well, I'm sure
promoters
something-
out there to reach out to the band and say, hey, we want to have you at this. It's not
I
up
think
to
they're
the
both
band.
I think they're both on the same record company, maybe Inside Out. I mean, they're doing a label tour. I don't know, but it's just so weird. This music's never going to die. It's always going to be popular with somebody.
Yeah.
It's not about the musicians, it's about the music.
Yeah.
All right. On
That's
that
what-
note, let's wrap this dog up, boys. What a great
Exactly.
discussion. This probably will break the internet, and we will have to reboot the whole internet. But all I can say is thank you, Rand Kelly, Mr. Prog. And I
welcome.
want to extend a thanks to the panel. What a great discussion. You
guys were great. They
do.
set me up. They helped me out. Actually, they gave me.
I'm never going to be able to wrap this up. I don't think. I don't think I am. I want to thank the panel, and I want to thank everybody for watching this episode. We do want to hear from you. What killed Prog, or did Prog kill itself? We want to hear from you. Leave a comment down there. If you'd like to be on these panels, you too could be on these panels. We'd love to have you here. We also have a Patreon where we have a lot of great musical discussions, and you can sign up for a lot of these talks and so forth. We also have a Ko-fi. Buy us a cup of coffee or a pint. We like that. And we also like donations because we just love money here on the Contrarians. And to be quite honest, we're just doing this to turn you on to music. So hopefully you got a lot out of this episode. And hey, maybe you got enough out of it that you might want to check out some of these bands that we talked about. So anyway, please leave a comment. What's next on the channel? God only knows. There's stuff coming out daily on this channel. So anyway, I want to thank the panel. I want to thank everybody for watching, and we will see you on the next one.
All right.